Hello and welcome to Antibes again. So it's been a while since I've done an update. I just thought I'd share a few little things I've been doing in various areas. So this is an old screenshot of Antibes. Now observe the landscape texture, the fan cobbles. It's basically a flat texture. There's some processing to make it a bit patchy, but that's a somewhat unsatisfactory texture. So I've done a bit of work on that, and here we are. So it's a little bit subtle, but I've added some parallax occlusion mapping, or POM for short, which just gives it a bit more of a 3D feel. The weak point in the map is where the ground joins the buildings. It's always a very flat linear sort of line. I might do a bit of work on that, maybe to add some decals, still don't know how to pronounce that word, to sort of make some transition-y things. The curbs are still a horrible texture, which I might come to at some point to fix that up. But overall the fan cobbles look a little bit more real and a little bit less ugly, to be honest. And there's a little decal, tomato, just to put a bit of dirt on. So I'm starting to dirty up the map a little bit to make it a bit more real and lived in. So let's just take a quick look at what I've done. Let's start with this one. No, where's it gone? Good start. Strong video. So this is the old fan cobble texture. There's just a bit of shenanigans because for some reason the texture was stretched in one direction, so I just automatically unstretch out the UVs by breaking it out. So that's the X, Y, the Y is multiplied by a bit, fudge factor, and then it's put back into a UV pair and then used to access the texture sample and the normals. These are nothing special. These are from a library of free textures, and you can see there's an alpha channel I've put in. Yeah, it's not working too. Anyway, I don't know what that's at, but at some painstaking cost, I have created a height map for this. Let me just drag that up just a second. Alright, so here is the old texture in Photoshop. So that's the colour of the cobbles, and then this is the height map automatically generated by CrazyBump. So it's not a very good height map, it's sort of edge detecting rather than anything else. You plug that into height map related things and it'll look better than a completely flat height map, but it's not quite right. So at some personal cost I manually traced out this height map. I literally used a brush to fill them all in. It took me a long time, it was very tedious, and it's not perfect because I did a bit of a cut and paste and that needs cleaning up at some point. But that is a very strong height map which allows very good visual effects. So I have updated the material with the parallax occlusion mapping. This is the most extreme version. The simple version, which is much cheaper in terms of rendering, is bump mapping, where you change the texture depending on the angle you're looking at. It doesn't stand up to close scrutiny. It's a lot less processing, but this is the sort of Rolls-Royce solution, and this is just the standard function, and these are the standard bits that tend to get plugged into that function. So I won't focus on that. This stuff's all in the documentation. This is a fix for temporal AA, and the rest are fairly standard sort of parameters, but the most important one is the height ratio, which determines, I'm going to move this off screen so you can't see it, but if I change the height ratio to something dramatically different, you'll see it is dramatically different. Now, some values of that, it doesn't work so well when you're close to it. It does some kind of ray tracing, so at some angles it looks okay. This is, yeah, let's try a slightly less extreme setting. So this is more than I had it on. It doesn't stand up to scrutiny down close. Let's hope there's no going prone on this stuff. That's a bit more bumpy, but I'll put it back to what it was and you'll see the sort of standard effect Now if I turn that to 0, you can see how it is with no occlusion mapping, but that is a bit, and that's enough to sort of stand up to scrutiny while giving it a slightly 3D feel. It means that when you're close you can see all this gravel, and when you're far away you see mostly the stones. And I've tweaked the roughness and the specularity so you get reflections off the cobbles but not off the ground, which is sort of both realistic and also makes the material behave a little bit more nicely with a bit more visual interest. So there's a few other things I've done. So this is standard POM stuff, parallax occlusion mapping, and with this setup, again this is the standard UVs I generated, you do various things. So this creates your parallax UVs. You also need to turn on this DDX DDY thing. I don't even know what it does, but you turn it on and there's a thing you do to do that. I can't remember what it is. Maybe you right click and do something, or there's a DDX version of this. I can't remember, but you need that for the normals. It's probably doing all kinds of magic. Now what I do is I use the height map. So I use the height map first of all. Oh, where's it gone? In my alpha channel, and I tell it that it's the alpha channel by this constant. That means that use the alpha. So I use the height map once to do the parallax occlusion mapping, and I do it again to do processing to split out the texture into cobble and gravel. So if the height map is 1, I'm telling it it's all cobble, it's that area. If the height map is 0, it's all gravel. So I'm kind of using the height map twice for 2 different things. Once for height and once for telling me if it's cobble or gravel. So I can apply roughness and specularity per component. So it's a bit like a linear interpolation, but I'm doing it manually. So I take the gravel component and multiply it with this thing. So what's coming off here is a sort of random texture. So random variation. So I apply a random variation in colour to the gravel to make it a bit more or less yellow. Again, that's a subtle thing, but if you tweak it, you can see what's going on. So let me just set a silly value for one of these. Alright, is that going to work? For some reason, not showing you. Let's try save it. I hope it doesn't break it. So it's just redoing landscape materials. This could take a while. Okay, so let's let that finish. So I've set that to a silly value, and then it combines it. So that just recombines the 2 components. It doesn't change the cobble component, and it then does separate processing for things like the ambient occlusion, and it tweaks it so it's not completely dark in the gaps. So that's a very simple function to get the ambient occlusion from the height map. Pixel depth offset is something that's a standard part of POM. The normal, roughness and specular are derived from the height map again. So a simple multiply to get the specularity means that the cobbles are more specular than the gaps, and a sort of inverse function for the roughness, whereby the cobbles have less roughness than the gravel. Anyway, so it kind of works. So that height map makes it very easy to process those bits separately and efficiently, and it also outputs the height map there. So let's see if that's done anything. Yeah, so you can see that there's a, well, it's pretty ugly now, but there's a patchiness to that texture. In other areas of the map it's less apparent, so yeah, it doesn't actually work that well now I'm looking at it, but you get the gist. You can tweak the gravel separately from the cobbles in a fairly efficient way. I'm just going to reset that before I forget, because that would be annoying. I think it was 1.5. Right. Another thing I've done, well, I've added more map. So here we are. We're in, so I used to have this side done, but this side I've now done this block. Pardon me. And this is the new telegraph pole system that I did in a video or two ago. This is fairly standard stuff, but it just gives a slightly different look to the map. Ideally a better look once that's finished recomputing the shaders. This is a material I've built in a previous video where it's a mix of wall and... oh god, don't move it. Alright, now this is a blend of the sort of the yellow stucco, another one of those words, with a plant. The heightmaps used to blend it. It doesn't work with that material particularly, but at a distance it's a reasonable effect. And I've had to sort of make sure the texture is UV mapped all around the building to avoid any discontinuities, which are quite jarring. Sorry, I just had to run down the stairs to get a parcel and I ran back up again because I'm an idiot. Anyway, here's some new stuff. So one thing I've done a bit differently. Oh look, there's a broken UV map, broken light map. It's a decal for some building details because I wanted to get that detail there. I thought I'd just run with it. Yeah, broken light map. This is the... yeah, I haven't tweaked the light maps yet. That is my permanent bugbear. I have moaned continuously about light maps. In Lightwave anyway. Dirtied it up a bit with another decal. Slightly rougher end of town this. Not in real life, just more grungy. So that's new. I've been working round the seafront. I've tidied up this harbour wall structure, added collision, got a bit of normal decal, just to sort of provide a bit of visual variety, break up the long unbroken bit and make it feel more lived in. Done a bit more work on the signs. Easy stuff to do, but it's nice, adds a bit of character. That's all new. Going around, I haven't finished that bit. This bit not finished, but this is it's getting there. And the beach area I've created, it's not very nice, but it's not a playable area, so I'm not going to invest any time in there at all. It's good enough, more or less. Might tidy up later. I've made a bit of a harbour. But a few things. This is nasty. The material, I've made it so that below a certain height it adds gunk from the sea, so the material changes colour as it changes height. What I'd like is some waves, but I digress. I've started adding some rocks just to break it up. I might have another go on the model to make it a bit more lumpy, but it's a nightmare with the textures. This is a very highly pommed parallax occlusion mappum texture material. It's a nice one. Where I've stretched it is slightly abusing it. It doesn't tile terribly well, and the texturing is awful. Well, there we go. So, but maybe I'll show you that material quickly. So it's a marketplace material that I have adapted, and a bit I've adapted it. So that's a bump mapping. Okay, this is a bump mapped material. It's a simpler construction. You just put this thing between the UVs and the texture samples using a height map. That'll be the height map. The alpha channel of whatever that is. The general purpose utility texture with roughness, specularity, debris, maybe AO. But what I did was... okay, this is something I added to put patchiness in. So using those sort of random textures, with a few of them at different scales, it hides the tiling. I've talked about that before. This is my thing to... I'm just going to put a comment in. To add the sea lime, do they call it? So taking the absolute position of the texture, breaking out the z-axis, taking off what's approximately the sea level, but it's you can tweak that. Specifying how far I want the transition to go, just dividing that, clamping it, doing a contrast to allow it to be a hard or soft transition, and then basically linear interpolating between no tint and this sort of green tint, and then multiplying that to the base diffuse. So it's not doing a whole lot, but it's very easy. So if I just move that up and down, you can see that it just automatically applies that tint. So it saves you having to do some fancy texture mapping for stuff near the sea. So this model has it, but that's actually baked into the model. And that is a low-res version of a marketplace asset. Very nice cliffs, but it's a bit low-res because I don't want to have 4K textures or 2K textures, whatever it was. Now here I had a challenge because the sea, it's got small waves, but it's got waves everywhere. Those are sort of sea ocean waves. Didn't look good in here. And I thought, well, how the hell am I going to do that? So I thought about chopping out a bit of the texture, doing an overlay or turning off the waves, and nothing was very satisfactory. But then and this sea is this mesh water surface, which has this mesh, which is yeah, funky. Now, can we show? Come back. Basically, it's a big mesh, big array. It's hard to see. There's probably a way to visualize that. Wireframe, that's the one. So that's the basic mesh, and the surface is doing shenanigans with, I don't know, tessellation, something. So chopping that up is one option, but nasty. So what I did was I hacked the material. So this is the material for that ocean surface, which has a few properties, but basically it's modifying this generic ocean surface. So let's bring that up. Oh, I've closed it, I don't want to do that. And I basically hacked it to use vertex colors. That's just a visualization. So let's go back, and I'm going to open that again. Where did it go? Right. So I'm going to bring this on. So I vertex painted on where I wanted it to be calm, and somewhere down here. So that's my vertex painting overlaid, and it's the inverse of what I actually painted. So that is showing. So white is no change, and red is, I can't remember. But so it's doing a hell of a lot in this texture, in this material. Let's get rid of that. Because it's doing all kinds of waves and things that I don't fully understand. But I basically use the vertex color to hack in to remove this. So if it's 111, no change. If you reduce it down, it's taking the blue channel. So if you remove the blue channel from the vertex color, it will chop down these waves. And I've done that in a few places. I didn't have to fully understand it to make it work just as well. Seafoam. So again, vertex colors. So I kept a bit of it. So if there's, so it keeps a minimum of 0.05. I could have used a clamp instead. Probably should have used a clamp. So to linear interpolate between a completely flat normal and whatever normal is provided. Tessellation. Again, world displacement. Multiplied that out. Get rid of the displacement. If it's so. The thing, basically I removed all the nice features of the ocean thing depending on the vertex color, and that's my visualizer. So let me just go back and turn that off if I can find it. Alright, so that's the visualization off, and you can see it's pretty much dead calm, which is that 0.05 worth of normal, just to give a hint of movement. There's some funny stuff going on with reflections. I've added a big reflection cube box so that you get so there's a screen space reflection, which you can tell because there's funny bits around the edge, but by adding the reflection spheres, cubes, whatever's, you get reflection even when you're not getting the proper screen space reflections, and you're getting the sun reflected and things like that. So yeah, the sea looks a lot better if you have your reflection captures working on it as well, to say the least. The transition between the screen space reflection and the normal reflection is a bit odd. It doesn't quite blend, but overall an improvement, I think. Same old modelling, blah 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 blah. There's another funky texture over here. This is a variant of that metal barrier, where up close it's masked because you want it to be masked. But the problem with masked textures that are close together is that they fade to black, and so at some point, it switches to a translucent material. Now that pops out annoyingly, so that's ugly, but if I don't do that, it fades entirely to black, which looks very, very odd. So as you go along here, you see them popping in, but I figure that's the best balance of working well at close-up and at distance. The trade-off is you get a nasty transition. This is probably a spawn area, so I guess attackers spawn. Work in progress. This is something that needs tidying up, but this is quite a nice photo to texture. So what I do is I have a photo of that somewhere, not to hand, map it onto material, texture and then material. In my modelling software, I then whap it on there, and then I cut it up and then extrude bits once they're aligned to the texture. So that's just extruded. Did a bit of texture tweaking, but basically the effect is rather nice. Not perfect, but you get a very photorealistic effect. And there are bits around cheating, but yeah. And this bit here took a lot of Photoshop work to edit out what was there already with the windows and doors. It's not perfect at all, but a bit more visual interest, a bit more rundown, lived in. So this part of the map's shaping up to be quite nice, actually, I think. This material here I made in Photoshop. I could possibly show you how I made that in Filter Forge, but Filter Forge allows you to first of all make seamless materials by standard, and to render out normals, roughness, and the diffuse and ambient occlusion separately, so you don't have to generate those. Those are as it intends. Sometimes the texture is a bit too sharp, so what I've done here is I used the height map in a similar way to the fan cobbles, and where the height map was low, I've substituted in the basic gravel material, scaled appropriately, that I've used in my landscape. So that is not what comes out of Filter Forge, and there are obviously some issues with that, and perhaps the height map needs to be tweaked. It's a bit fuzzy up close, but overall that gives you a bit of variation and doesn't look too ugly, and that is fairly close to how that bit of pavement actually is. I've done some level closing off, so that would normally go through to the harbour, but I don't want to build that harbour. That's going to be a lot of work and a lot of performance loss, so I've blocked that off. It's not a great block off, but there's a little bit of variety in how the level is blocked off throughout it, so that also helps to get your bearings and to distinguish bits of the map. I did a lot of work importing shop fronts, menus and posters. I'm changing to, that's not right, a sort of better methodology of atlasing this stuff together. So if I can find this new front door I made, well, there's a poster atlas. So simple material, but what I want is this texture. So it's just a Photoshop job. Just found some photo references. This is stuff from my photos in Lightroom from when I wandered around on Antibes. I don't want to have stuff that's too specific for IP protection reasons. I don't want to get in trouble for using anybody's IP, but, well, I'm not making any money off this, so I don't think anybody will care. It's my current view, but I could replace these if need be. So if I have multiple posters per building, I just have the one texture, one material, which keeps the material use down, which is what you want to do. And I've got a similar thing for the menus. There we go. So they're all atlas together. And I did a bit of tweaking on the material to change the roughness. So I've defined an alpha for this texture. You can see it there. So I just overlaid crudely this alpha, which defines the roughness. So a higher value, whiter value, is more rough, which means less shiny, which means the blackboards are not rough, but they have more specularity, I think. So anyway, it kind of works. There's a bit of shininess built into the textures themselves. It's not ideal, but when you're looking at it in the level, you know, you don't really notice unless you're thinking about it. But there's also shininess on top of that, there you see. So I'm trying to do more atlas stuff. I've also done an atlas for shop boards. There we go, last one. Show. No, that's a different shop front. Somewhere. Shop front. That looks more like it. No. Somewhere, right, there we go, that's the one. No, that's not the one, that's a new one, but it's not the atlas one. Oh, sorry. That's the one. Right, so this at the moment is a very simple material. But you see there what I've done is I've just done that. I might go back and add some more of these shop fronts from the menu, from the map. But I don't think I'm going to reduce much material use there. But moving forwards, certainly on other maps, maybe UK-based urban maps, I'm going to use this approach of just putting everything in a big texture so that I only have to use one material for the shop fronts per block. If I'm doing blocks, hopefully I won't ever do blocks again. Just to keep it more efficient, and it means that I'm more inclined to reuse. So there's a poster there, and I just put a poster placeholder there rather than the menu. So I'm more inclined to use more textures because I can without incurring any material costs. Pardon me. So new thing again. Alpha's defined shininess. So overall, there's no three-dimensionality to it, but it's all right. And that texture included that hoarding. These letters are made in Lightwave using the Lightwave logo generator, text generator. Needed a bit of work to tidy it up and reduce it down a number of points, but I'm just trying to get lots of different kinds of things so that overall the effect is a big complicated mass of real stuff rather than, you know, all being a particular style of texture material. Just thinking what else there is. I'm going to build some more stuff there, maybe some little umbrellas. But, you know, it's otherwise just more of the same, building more stuff. I'm about to block this out a bit more. I've got all my edges defined now to the map. So in theory, you could run around on this as an incomplete map. But yeah, there's a few more tips and tricks. Let's go up. I've remove some more superfluous bits. So you can see it's slightly more defined where you're going. So all the action is happening in this main bit here, but there's some bits off there which I need just to provide a visual edge to the map, and I might put a kink in them like I did there so I don't have to do anything beyond there. But I'd like to keep it realistic if I can. So it's starting to look a little bit more finished, to be honest, and that will be lovely. Can't wait. Nice to play it too. Anyway, there we go, little update. Have fun.